Daniel stood on the balcony of the alien shipyard, his hands covered in dust and grease from the long hours of work. Around him, alien engineers moved with swift, precise motions, their voices echoing across the metallic halls. They were tall, graceful, and their silver-blue armor reflected the light of the twin suns above. Yet in the middle of them all, Daniel seemed like an outsider, an ordinary human among beings who looked carved from crystal and fire. It had been months since the peace treaty between Earth and the kingdom of Queen Lysera. The Queen had granted humans a place in her court, a chance to share knowledge and technology. Many humans who arrived had quickly tried to gain favor, some seeking power, others hoping for wealth. They filled the grand halls with polite words and endless compliments. But Daniel was different. He did not linger in the throne room or chase attention. He worked quietly and constantly, in the shadows of the shipyard where damaged vessels waited for repair. This difference did not go unnoticed. From her high balcony in the palace, Queen Lysera often watched the shipyards, her golden eyes, sharper than any hawks, would follow the human who bent over broken engines. His face focused, his voice calm as he gave instructions to alien workers who had grown to respect him. She wondered why he never appeared at the feast she hosted, why his name was rarely spoken among the flatterers in her hall. Others brought her gifts, words of admiration, and promises of loyalty. Daniel brought none of these things. He simply kept his distance. Whispers began to spread. "The human does not bow," one courtier said in the Queen's chamber. "He fears her beauty," another claimed. "No," argued a third. "He hides some secret. He does not trust us." The Queen listened to them all but said nothing. In truth, she was curious. In her long reign, she had seen thousands kneel, smile, and speak carefully chosen words. But Daniel, the quiet human, never tried to impress her. He looked at her once in the hall when she passed by, bowed politely, and returned to his work. That moment stayed in her mind. His eyes were steady, not fearful, not greedy, only respectful in a way that was unfamiliar to her. Life in the palace moved with its usual rhythm. Musicians played in the evenings, warriors trained in the courtyards, and advisors filled her ears with politics. But no matter how many voices surrounded her, the Queen often found herself thinking about that lone human in the shipyard. Daniel's days were long and silent. He would rise before dawn, drink a simple cup of water, and begin repairing engines, damaged in border battles. He preferred tools to speeches, gears to ceremonies. He listened to the humming of reactors more than to the gossip of the court. The alien workers respected him because he never treated them as tools or servants. He asked for their ideas, valued their skills, and worked beside them without complaint. They began to call him Steadfast One, a name that slowly reached the palace. Still, he avoided the Queen. On the day of the Feast of Unity, when all humans and aliens gathered in the throne room to celebrate the peace treaty, Daniel was absent. The halls were filled with music and laughter, the Queen herself radiant in her crown of silver light. Every human ambassador rose to praise her strength, her wisdom, her beauty. But one chair was empty, the chair meant for Daniel. When the Queen asked her guard where the missing human was, she was told, "He is in the shipyard, Majesty, repairing a vessel." Lysera's golden eyes narrowed. "While the galaxy celebrates, he works alone." "Yes, Majesty." The Queen dismissed her guard, though her thoughts lingered. She could not understand. She had ruled for decades, and in all that time, no envoy, no warrior, no servant had ever refused her invitation. Yet this one human did not come. The courtiers began to feed her doubts. "Perhaps he disrespects you, my Queen," they whispered. "Perhaps he despises our kind." But deep in her heart, Lysera did not believe those words. She remembered the calm bow he had given her. It had not been mockery. It had not been pride. It had been something else, something she could not yet name. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his work. He knew the Queen noticed his absence. He knew whispers circled like storms above his head. But he stayed silent. He had no desire for crowns, no hunger for attention. In the human wars he had survived, he had seen leaders praised while ordinary soldiers bled. He had learned that power was often a mask, and behind it was loneliness. To him, Queen Lysera was not just a ruler to fear or worship. She was a person carrying the weight of a galaxy on her shoulders. And Daniel respected her enough not to add to that burden with false praise. Yet the distance he kept only deepened the mystery. The Queen's advisors urged her to demand answers. A ruler should not be ignored, they said. Summon him. Question him. But Lysera hesitated. She was a queen feared by many, yet the thought of asking this quiet human why he avoided her stirred something she could not name. Was it pride? Was it curiosity? Or was it something deeper, something she had not felt in years? That night she walked alone through the palace gardens. The twin moons lit the silver leaves and the fountains whispered in the stillness. She thought of Daniel in the shipyard, his hands moving with quiet skill, his eyes fixed not on her throne, but on his work. She wondered what kind of human he was. She wondered why his absence echoed louder than the praises of 100 voices. For Daniel, the days remained unchanged. He tightened bolts, rewired engines, and guided alien apprentices with patient words. But even he could feel the weight of eyes upon him. The guards passed more often, the whispers grew louder, and the silence between him and the Queen stretched thin like glass about to crack. And soon he knew the question would come. The morning sun spread its twin beams across the great city of Alindra, painting the palace walls in silver and gold. The bells of the high towers rang as soldiers began their training, and the markets filled with voices of merchants from across the stars. Yet inside the palace, Queen Lysera's mind was far from the joy of her people. Her thoughts circled again and again around one name: Daniel. For days she had allowed the mystery to remain. She told herself that a queen should not waste her mind on a single human worker. And yet, whenever she sat on her throne and heard the endless songs of flattery from both humans and her own kind, her golden eyes would wander to the empty chair near the ambassadors. The absence spoke louder than the words of the many who sought her favor. The court had grown restless with his silence. "Majesty," said High Counselor Merak one evening, bowing low, "this human shows no respect. He has ignored your feasts, your honors, your gifts. Why should we allow him to walk free in your shipyards?" "Perhaps he is hiding a plot," suggested another. "Perhaps his distance is only a mask." Lysera raised her hand, and the voices fell quiet. "I have ruled long enough to know the sound of falsehood. That human speaks little, yet he carries no malice in his eyes. I will not call him traitor without reason." But her own certainty wavered. When night fell, she walked again through the gardens. Her steps were silent across the glowing stones, and the fountains seemed to whisper secrets. She remembered the single time Daniel had looked at her directly. His eyes had not begged, had not flinched. They had only acknowledged her with a calm respect. It was not worship, and it was not defiance. What unsettled her most was that she could not read it. For a queen used to reading hearts like open scrolls, his silence was like a locked door. The next day she summoned her guard. "Bring me reports from the shipyard. I wish to know what the human does." The captain bowed and returned at sunset. "Majesty, he works from dawn until the stars rise. He repairs the vessels that even our engineers cannot restore. He eats with the workers, not in the officers' halls. He does not complain. He does not boast. The workers call him brother." Lysera listened with narrowed eyes. "And yet, when I call for feasts, he is absent?" "Yes, Majesty. He refuses politely. He claims the shipyard needs his hands more than the palace needs his presence." That answer struck her heart strangely. A queen whose word could move armies had been set aside for broken engines. It was not insult that she felt, but something else, a question that grew heavier each day. In the throne room, whispers filled the air. "Why does she let him ignore her?" asked one courtier. "Because she fears his answer," said another. "In secret." Lysera heard them, though they thought she could not. She held her dignity as always, her crown steady upon her brow, but their words echoed inside her mind. Did she fear his answer? Perhaps. But more than fear, she felt an itch of curiosity that burned hotter with each passing day. Finally, she made her decision. One morning, she sent a sealed order to the shipyard. Daniel was to appear before her, not as a worker, not as a guest, but as one summoned directly by the Queen of Elindra. When the messenger arrived, Daniel looked up from the open engine he was repairing. His hands were blackened with oil, his face tired yet calm. The alien workers around him fell silent at the sight of the Queen's emblem on the scroll. "You are called to the palace," the messenger said with a sharp voice. "The Queen herself demands your presence." Daniel wiped his hands on a cloth and nodded once. "I will come." The workers exchanged uneasy glances. To be summoned by the Queen was no small matter. Some feared for him, others envied him, but Daniel showed no sign of either fear or excitement. He finished tightening the last bolt on the engine before standing up. "A vessel must be ready before a speech," he said softly, and then followed the messenger. The palace was vast and filled with shining halls. Columns of silver rose like trees and paintings of ancient battles covered the walls. Daniel walked with steady steps, ignoring the stares of nobles who whispered as he passed. There is the human who ignores her. He must be foolish or bold. He will regret this, but Daniel did not pause. He followed the messenger until they reached the throne chamber. Lysera sat high upon her seat, her crown glimmering with the light of the suns. Her golden eyes followed him as he entered. The hall fell silent. Courtiers leaned forward, eager to hear what would unfold. This was the moment they had waited for. The Queen would finally confront the human who refused her call. Daniel bowed politely, the same calm bow he had given once before. "Majesty." Lysera studied him. His voice carried no fear, no false charm, only steady respect. She raised her hand and the hall quieted further. "Leave us," she commanded. Gasps filled the chamber. To dismiss the court for a single human was unheard of. Yet one by one the courtiers and guards withdrew until only the Queen and Daniel remained in the vast chamber. The great doors closed with a heavy sound, sealing them in silence. Lysera leaned forward on her throne, her golden eyes piercing into his. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady but low. "Why do you avoid me?" The question hung in the air like a blade. For a moment, the silence was so deep that even the sound of the fountains outside seemed distant. Daniel met her gaze. His expression did not change, but inside his mind, memories stirred. The battles he had seen, the crowns that had demanded loyalty while men suffered, the endless speeches that had hidden loneliness behind gold and steel. He drew a slow breath. "Because you are more than a queen," he said at last, her eyes narrowed. "More?" "Yes." His voice was calm but firm. "I see not only the crown, not only the throne. I see the weight you carry, and I will not treat you as others do, with flattery and empty words. To stand near you and speak lies would be a greater insult than to keep my distance." For the first time in many years, Lysera felt her breath catch. The words pierced deeper than any praise she had ever received. She had expected excuses, perhaps fear, perhaps rebellion. She had not expected truth. Her hands tightened on the arms of her throne. The silence stretched between them, heavy and unbroken. Daniel bowed again, respectfully. "That is why, Majesty." Lysera did not answer. She could not. For the first time in her reign, words failed her. The great throne chamber was silent after Daniel's words. The echoes of his calm voice seemed to hang in the tall columns, reaching even the painted walls. Queen Lysera sat still, her golden eyes locked on him, but her mind was far away. She was used to many things, to hearing songs that praised her beauty, to listening to warriors call her the strongest, to hearing counselors tell her she was wise beyond measure. But she was not used to silence. She was not used to honesty so bare, that it stripped away the crown on her head and left her only as a woman before a man. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Her pride held her still, but her heart trembled in a way she had not felt in years. She waved her hand at last, her voice soft. "You may go." Daniel bowed once more, steady and calm, and turned toward the great doors. His steps did not echo with fear or triumph. They were simply the steps of a man who had spoken his truth. When the heavy doors closed behind him, Lysera let out a long breath she had not realized she was holding. For the rest of the day, her court buzzed with whispers. The nobles wanted to know what had happened in the private meeting. The guards, though sworn to silence, guessed and invented tales. Some said the queen had punished him. Others claimed she had been insulted. But Lysera gave no answers. She sat through the ceremonies with her crown heavy on her brow, her mind wandering back to the simple words he had spoken. That night she did not sleep. She walked the corridors of her palace, her robes trailing behind her. In every hall, the portraits of her ancestors looked down at her. Kings and queens who had ruled with iron will, who had demanded endless loyalty. They had been praised, they had been feared, but had they ever been seen? She stopped before the largest portrait, a queen who had ruled 2 centuries before. Lysera whispered, "Did they ever speak to you as they spoke to me today?" The painted eyes gave no answer. Her curiosity grew like fire. In the following days, Lysera did something she had not done in years. She left her throne and walked the shipyards herself. Disguised in a plain cloak with only 2 guards in the distance, she stood among the workers and watched. Daniel was there, as always, bent over an engine with sleeves rolled high, his face streaked with oil. He gave instructions to the alien workers with patience, never raising his voice, never seeking credit when a repair succeeded. One young apprentice made a mistake, spilling coolant across the floor. Daniel did not scold. Instead, he knelt, showed the apprentice how to fix the error, and even laughed lightly to ease the shame. Lysera's heart moved in a way she had not expected. Her court was full of nobles who fought for her smile, yet here was a human who gave his smile freely to those who needed it most. She followed him with her eyes for hours. He never once looked toward the palace. It was as if the throne, the crown, the endless politics meant nothing to him. His world was the tools in his hands and the people beside him. She left that day more unsettled than ever. Her advisors noticed her silence in meetings. "Majesty, is something wrong?" they asked. She shook her head. "Continue." But her thoughts remained with Daniel. The second time she observed him, he was working late under the twin moons. Most workers had gone home, yet he remained, adjusting the circuits of a damaged starfighter. His hands moved with steady skill, though his body showed signs of exhaustion. She wondered why he pushed himself so hard. No command demanded it. No reward waited. Still he worked. She stepped closer this time, letting her presence be known. The guards at her side shifted, but she raised her hand to silence them. Daniel looked up, surprised, but not afraid. He bowed lightly. "Majesty." "You work well. Others rest," she said. "The engines do not repair themselves," he replied simply. "Do you not wish for recognition?" she asked. "Your skill could earn you wealth, even rank in my court." Daniel shook his head. "Recognition fades. Engines last longer when cared for. I prefer to leave behind something that works." His words, plain and unpolished, felt heavier than all the poetry of her nobles. She found herself without reply. For the second time, silence was her only answer. She nodded once and left him to his work. The third time she came, she did not wear her crown at all. She wore only a simple robe, blending with the workers. Daniel noticed her but treated her no differently than the others. He explained repairs, guided apprentices, and let her stand beside him without demanding attention. The longer she watched, the clearer it became. This man did not avoid her out of fear or hate. He avoided her because he refused to add false weight to her already heavy crown. When she returned to the palace, she stood before her mirror. The golden crown shone on her brow, the symbol of all her power. But she saw something else in her reflection, a woman who longed just once to be seen without the crown, The next council meeting felt emptier than ever. Her advisors spoke of treaties, trade, and border patrols, but she heard little of it. She remembered Daniel's steady voice. To stand near you and speak lies would be a greater insult than to keep my distance. His words haunted her. They echoed even as she closed her eyes at night, even as she walked through her gardens. For the first time in many years, Queen Lysera felt unsure of herself. At last, she called her most trusted guard. Bring him again, she said softly, but this time not to the throne chamber. Bring him to the gardens at night. The guard bowed deeply, though his eyes showed surprise. Yes, Majesty. Lysera stood beneath the silver trees, the fountains whispering around her, waiting. For years she had been the one who was worshipped, the one who held power. But tonight she waited like someone seeking answers, like someone whose crown no longer gave comfort. When Daniel arrived, he bowed politely as always. Majesty, Lysera studied him for a long time. You spoke truth to me once and it left me without words. I wish to know more. Not as queen, but as Lysera. Daniel looked at her, and though he did not smile, his calm gaze carried the same respect as before. He said nothing yet, waiting for her to continue. And in that still night, with only the trees and stars as witness, the Queen of Elindra prepared to ask again the question that had burned in her heart, why his silence spoke louder than 1,000 voices. The palace gardens were quiet that night, lit only by the glow of the twin moons and the soft light of the crystal fountains. Queen Lysera stood among the silver trees, her robe plain, her crown absent. For the first time in many years, she felt the weight of her own silence. When Daniel entered, he did not seem surprised to find her without her royal ornaments. He bowed once, steady as always. Majesty. Tonight I am only Lysera, she said, her voice softer than before. Daniel raised his head. He did not argue, nor did he look confused. He simply accepted her words as if he had already seen beyond her crown long before she removed it. For a long while neither spoke. The garden was filled only with the sound of water and the whisper of leaves. Lysera walked slowly along the stone path, and Daniel followed at a respectful distance. She stopped near the largest fountain, its waters glowing faintly with starlight. You said I carry weight, she began. More than the crown, more than the throne. Tell me what you meant. Daniel stood quietly before answering. Every leader carries a weight, Majesty. But I have seen how yours is different. Your people love you, but they also fear the power you hold. Every word you speak is treated as law. Every gesture is taken as command. That weight is not only on your shoulders, it is on your heart. Her golden eyes lowered. She had heard praise all her life, but never had anyone spoken of her burden so plainly. She wondered how he could see what others could not. Do you think me weak for carrying it? She asked. No, Daniel said. I think you are stronger than most, but strength does not mean you are without pain. Lysera felt her breath catch. No one had ever spoken to her this way. Her counselors told her she was flawless. Her generals told her she was unbreakable. But this human, with simple words, reminded her that she was more than a ruler. She was a person who felt, who doubted, who longed. That night was only the beginning. In the days that followed, Lysera found herself leaving the throne more often. She visited the shipyard, sometimes openly, sometimes in disguise. She watched Daniel work beside her people as though no barrier of species or rank stood between them. He lifted heavy parts with the workers, shared meals from the same bowls, and even laughed at their small jokes. The workers respected him, not because of power or position, but because he stood with them as one of their own. This was strange, to her. In her court, respect was always tied to titles, to wealth, to force. Yet Daniel had none of these things, and still he commanded trust. She began to wonder if she, with all her crowns and armies, was truly respected, or if she was only feared. One afternoon, Lysera stood on a high balcony looking down at the training yards. Her warriors clashed with their shining blades, moving like shadows in a dance of strength. She had always been proud of them, But now she remembered Daniel's hands covered in oil, guiding an apprentice patiently. There had been no fear in that young worker's eyes, only trust. She turned away from the warriors and whispered to herself, "Which is greater, to be feared or to be trusted?" That evening, her advisor Marak noticed her silence. "Majesty," he said carefully, "the nobles grow uneasy. They say you spend too much time watching the human. They fear he clouds your judgment." Lizara's eyes flashed, though her voice remained calm. "It is not judgment he clouds, counselor. It is judgment he clears. For once, I see without the haze of flattery." Marak bowed quickly, hiding his unease. But Lysera's words were true. She felt as though Daniel's presence stripped away the armor she had built around herself. Without the endless praises, she could see herself more clearly, not as a queen made of gold, but as a woman who wanted to be understood. One night she returned to the gardens again, and Daniel was brought before her. This time she dismissed her guards, leaving them alone. She sat on the edge of the fountain, her robe simple, her crown nowhere in sight. "Tell me honestly," she said, her eyes searching his face. "Do you avoid me because you do not like me?" Daniel shook his head. "No, Majesty. I avoid you because I do not wish to become another voice in the crowd. Everyone else looks at you and sees power. I look at you and see a person. And sometimes, the kindest thing one can do for another is to give them space." Her chest tightened. No counselor, no noble, no warrior had ever offered her space. They all pressed close, eager to be seen, eager to gain something. But Daniel had stepped back, giving her room to breathe. "And yet," she whispered, "your silence calls to me louder than their songs." Daniel bowed his head, saying nothing. The days stretched into weeks. Lysera found herself seeking reasons to cross his path. Once she asked him to explain the workings of a starship engine, though she knew little of machines. Another time, she joined the workers' meal, sitting quietly near him as the others spoke and laughed. She watched the way he treated them, with fairness, with patience, with respect that was not tied to rank. And she began to learn. She began to speak less in the throne room, listening more. She began to walk the city without her crown, hearing the voices of her people as they truly were. The nobles grew confused, but the common folk felt her presence more deeply than ever. All of this was because of the human who had shown her what it meant to be seen. One evening, as the sun set and the palace glowed with the light of torches, Lysera stood before her mirror again. She placed the crown on her head, heavy with jewels, and stared at her reflection. For the first time, she wondered if the crown was not a symbol of power but a mask that hid her true self. She lifted it off slowly and set it aside. The woman who looked back at her without the crown was still strong, still regal, but also vulnerable. For the first time in decades, she allowed herself to see that. That night, she returned to the gardens, once more. Daniel was there as though he had known she would call. They walked together in silence until she finally spoke. "Daniel," she said, her voice softer than the sound of the fountains. "You have shown me something my court never could. You have shown me myself." Daniel bowed his head slightly, as if accepting her words but not claiming credit. Lysera turned her face toward the stars. "I have been a queen all my life, but now when I look at you I feel as though I am only Lysera. Not a ruler, not a symbol, just a woman." She did not expect an answer, and Daniel gave none. But the silence between them was not empty. It was full of respect, of truth, of something she had not felt in years. And so, the Queen of Alindra found herself standing without her armor, without her crown, without the endless voices of praise. For the first time, she was simply herself. And in the quiet presence of one human, that was enough. The following days in the palace were not the same. Queen Lysera still sat on her throne, still listened to counselors speak of trade routes and border patrols, still signed decrees and made decisions for her people. But something deep inside her had shifted. She carried Daniel's words like a quiet flame, one that burned not with pain but with clarity. Her court noticed the change. "Majesty," whispered one noble, "you speak less in meetings." "Majesty," murmured another, "you no longer demand praise in the feasts." But Lysera only smiled faintly and let their confusion remain. For the first time in many years, she found no joy in the sound of empty flattery. She found joy instead in silence. Silence like the one she shared in the gardens with the human who dared to see her as more than a crown. Daniel continued his work in the shipyards as if nothing had changed. He repaired engines, guided apprentices, and shared meals with the workers. But though he lived as quietly as ever, the Queen's presence lingered near him more often. Sometimes she came openly, her guards at her side. Sometimes she came alone, her robe plain, blending among the workers. And each time Daniel treated her the same, with respect but without fear, without greed, without false praise. That was what unsettled her most. Everyone else shaped their words to please her, but Daniel's words were plain, as steady as stone. And in their plainness they carried more weight than 100 golden speeches. One evening, as the suns fell and the sky darkened into shades of violet, Lysera sent for Daniel again. This time she did not summon him to the throne room or even the gardens. She asked for him in the Hall of Stars, a vast chamber filled with crystal windows that revealed the galaxies above. It was a place of quiet, where rulers came to reflect on the universe beyond their world. Daniel entered as calmly as ever. He bowed lightly. "Majesty." Lysera stood by the largest window, her crown absent once more. The starlight cast silver across her face, softening her sharp features. For a moment she looked not like a queen but like a woman searching for something unseen. She turned toward him slowly. "Do you know why I called you here?" Daniel shook his head. "No, Majesty." Lysera walked closer, her steps measured. "Since the day you refused my feasts, I have asked myself why. Since the day you stood before me in my throne chamber, I have carried your answer in my heart, and since then, I have tried to understand what it means." Daniel remained silent, his calm gaze steady on her. "You said you avoid me because you see more than the crown, more than the throne. You see the weight I carry. Do you know what those words did to me?" she asked softly. Daniel shook his head again. Lysera's golden eyes shimmered with the light of the stars. "They left me speechless." The words hung in the vast chamber, like a secret finally freed. For decades she had spoken with the voice of authority, with the certainty of power. But that one moment, when he had looked at her and spoken truth without fear, had taken her voice away. It had broken through the armor she had built around her heart. She stepped closer, her voice quiet but steady. "I am a queen who has faced wars, rebellions, and betrayals. I have stood unshaken before enemies who sought my throne. But when you spoke to me that day, I could not reply. You are the only one who has ever done that." Daniel bowed his head. "I only spoke what I believed, Majesty." "Exactly," Lysera whispered. "You spoke what you believed, not what I wished to hear. Do you understand how rare that is in a palace built on ceremony and fear?" Daniel's eyes lowered, but his voice remained calm. "Perhaps rare, Majesty, but truth is not a gift, it is a duty." Lysera's lips curved into the faintest smile. His words were heavy, yet they freed her. For so long she had been surrounded by chains made of praises and expectations. Now, before her, stood a human who cut through those chains with nothing but honesty. They stood in silence for a long moment, the stars stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Then Lysera spoke again. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Daniel?" He looked up, his brow slightly furrowed. "No, Majesty. I see a man unshaken by crowns, a man who does not bend to fear or desire. I see the kind of strength my court has forgotten, the strength to speak truth even when it is not pleasing." Daniel said nothing, but his silence carried respect. Lysera took a deep breath. "I have been worshipped, feared, praised, and obeyed. But never in all my years as queen have I been seen. You, Daniel, saw me not as a ruler but as a person. That is why your answer left me speechless." Her words trembled in the air, but they were steady in her heart. Daniel bowed once more. "Then I am glad, Majesty, for sometimes the greatest respect we can give another is to see them as they truly are." The Queen's heart stirred at those words. She turned back to the window, looking at the stars beyond. For the first time in many years, she felt something she had long thought lost: peace. The days that followed were different. Lysera ruled still, but her voice carried new weight. She listened more closely, not only to her advisors, but to the common folk. She walked more often without her crown, and when people spoke to her, they felt less fear and more trust. The court whispered of change, some confused, some wary, but the people felt it. They felt their queen had become closer, more human, more real. All of this had begun with one human's simple refusal to play the game of flattery. Daniel remained in the shipyards, unchanged. He worked, he guided, he repaired. But those who saw him noticed the quiet respect the queen now carried for him. When she passed the shipyards, her eyes always searched for him. When he bowed, she returned the gesture with the faintest nod, something no other human or alien had ever received. In the silence between them, there was no crown, no throne, no endless burden of politics. There was only truth. One evening, when the suns were setting and the skies turned gold, Lysera stood on her balcony overlooking the city. She thought of all the voices that had surrounded her for years, and how none of them had ever reached her heart. Then she thought of one human whose single answer had broken through everything. She whispered to the wind as if he could hear, "You left me speechless, Daniel," and in that silence I found myself again. The crown still sat upon her brow. The throne still belonged to her. But she knew now that her true strength was not in the jewels or the golden halls. It was in being seen. And for that, she would forever carry the memory of the human who dared to see her not as a queen, but as Lysera,